We're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen, because we've got another live event going on. We've got a fair bit happening this morning, but thanks very much to Francis Leach and Paul Kennedy there after that Andrew Demetriou announcement. Let's go to Canberra now, where the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, is speaking to the media.
For many decades to come to be a very significant part of it, but we have to build trade across a lot of other areas. And people don't realise, but at the moment, China is our biggest resources market, of course, that would be known. But it's our largest source of foreign students, it's our largest source of tourists, it's our largest services market, it's our largest agricultural market, it's a growing source of foreign investment. And just to give you one example, red meat in 2012 we exported 80,000 tonnes. In 2013 we exported 260,000 tonnes. These sorts of phenomena are there, but there's enormous competition around the world to capture this changing nature of the Chinese market. And unless we put in the hard yards, establish the linkages, the contacts, things like the reverse Colombo plan, these sorts of things, all about long-term sustainable linkages and contacts and understanding and trust that's being built. That's why we are taking this initiative, amongst others, and as the Prime Minister said, several hundred, already some 300 have nominated. We're looking for hundreds more to go to Australia Week in China. We've got a special week across 4 cities, Shanghai, Beijing, Chengdu and Guangzhou. Those 4 cities will have teams of people and ministers with them, and including the Prime Minister, who's taking a more extensive North Asia visit at the same time. So we will be organising industry-themed programs throughout the several days in all of those cities, covering things like agribusiness, mining equipment and technology and services, education, vocational and higher education, of course, health, medical devices, a lot of those things that sit around our great strengths in medical research, tourism, of course, food, beverage and consumer services, including luxury goods, financial services, building services, aged care services, new technologies, a whole raft of things the things that we do best as a country, our strengths, that's what we're focusing on. Brand Australia is very strong, not only in China but in the region, and we aim to capitalise and build on that in the years ahead.
Prime Minister, the first Assistant Secretary for DFAT for North Asia, Peter Rose, said that last week that the treatment of Julie Bishop late last year by the Chinese Foreign Minister was the rudest thing he'd seen in 30 years of being in the diplomatic corps. Do you accept that you've got a bit of smoothing over to do when it comes to the Beijing relationship?
I met with the Chinese ambassador a week or so back, and he assured me that the Chinese government at the very highest of levels was looking forward to my trip, was looking forward to Australia Week in China. From time to time there are always going to be issues, but there is a fundamental strength to this relationship, and I want to build on those strengths.
Prime Minister, after you were elected, you set an ambition to seal the FTA with China within 12 months. You said in your opening remarks today you're hopeful. How confident are you can still meet that ambition?
I'll ask Andrew to add to this answer, but look, I'd like to achieve it, obviously, and we will do everything we reasonably can to make it happen. But in the end, there are 2 sides to a negotiation. We're keen to conclude the negotiation. We want to get the best possible deal that we can, but we do want a deal. Now, in the end, it does depend upon our Chinese partners, but we are confident that it is doable. Andrew?
We had another round of negotiations last week, both with China and separately with Japan. I've had contact with my counterparts in both countries now in January, again in February. Met personally with the Japanese Trade Minister. I looked at getting to China in this trip and hoping to catch up. But we are making good progress on both fronts, in fact. So I'm not going to put a date on it, but I think things are progressing. in a very satisfactory manner, and the relationships in terms of negotiations are not dissimilar to that which we experienced during the South Korean.
Just further to that question on the Chinese FTA.
David and then Andrew, okay?
Thanks, Prime Minister. You've put reforms to the Qantas Sale Act on the agenda. Now, one long-term outcome is surely an alliance between Qantas and possibly a Chinese airline, possibly an investment. Would you welcome that? Would you have any concerns about that?
We're open for business, and that means that we're open for investment. Obviously, investment has to pass the Foreign Investment Review Board tests, but nevertheless, we are open for business and we are welcoming of investment. If we are able to change the Sale Act in the ways that we hope, obviously it will then be up to Qantas and potential partners to talk about what might happen. But we certainly look forward to an unshackled Qantas, a Qantas which can continue to be one of the world's great airlines.
Is it 100%
Well, I think Andrew was first and then Paul.
Minister, Prime Minister, just clarify,
Andrew and then
is
Paul.
it 100% ownership?
Well, if we repeal the Qantas Sale Act, there will still be a number of tests and conditions that would have to be passed. First of all foreign ownership, or all substantial foreign ownership, has to go through the Foreign Investment Review Board process. And then there's a separate requirement for international airlines based in Australia. So both of those tests would have to be passed, and it is, as I understand it, impossible for an Australian-based overseas airline to be more than 49% overseas owned. Andrew?
Gentlemen, there are reports that are coming out of China saying that the Chinese have actually put the FTA on the back burner. Do you at least concede that there are issues that have to be resolved diplomatically on other areas, such as we've had some military issues that have raised their head in recent weeks? Do you concede that they have to be resolved before the FTA has any chance?
I saw those reports in the Australian press and did follow it through. In fact, I got the transcript, the exact transcript of the question that was asked of not the Minister as it was reported, but of the spokesman for the Ministry for Commerce. And if you look at the transcript, it's quite clear that the journalist asked about 3 specific free trade agreements that China is currently participating with, and he responded to those 3. And it's quite clear from the transcript that he was talking about the local area, because the question was about Japan and Korea and the RCEP, right, the regional agreement, and he answered quite specifically those 3, and I think it was, in my view, a misrepresentation of the question and the answer, and Australia wasn't mentioned and wasn't invited to be talked about in that question and answer. So, I just say to you again, we're in constant contact with the Ministry of Commerce, with their team. We had negotiations again last week. They went extremely well, and I think we're on track to finish the Chinese and the Japanese in a satisfactory timeframe.
And if I could just add to that, Andrew, look, to use the old phrase, it is possible to walk and chew gum at the same time. It is possible to have a respectful disagreement with the Chinese on one issue and at the same time be strengthening the overall relationship, including trade relationships. Mark?
Prime Minister, China has been critical of our treatment of asylum seekers just recently, making reflections about our human rights record. Is this an opportunity for you to have that discussion with China, or is this just about trade?
Well, this is a trade delegation, but obviously in a strong and robust relationship, it's possible for people to raise all sorts of subjects. My understanding is that the Chinese observations about our policies on border protection took place as part of the human rights dialogue, which we regularly have with China, and we have some observations from time to time about things in their country. They, from time to time, have observations about things in our country, and that's fair enough. That's exactly why this human rights dialogue was established. but I think all of us want to strengthen the overall relationship. I think that the overall relationship is in very good shape. I think it's good and getting better, and it's in both countries' overwhelming interests to further strengthen the trade and investment and economic relationship, and that's what this is all about. Lane?
Are you and Joe Hockey at odds over what to do about Qantas, given his previous support for debt guarantee?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We both accept that airlines are an essential service, and obviously in the event that there is any challenge to essential services, government has an important role. But any suggestion that we are anywhere close to that is just completely wrong. And what we want to do is to ensure that Qantas continues to be one of the world's great airlines. We want to ensure that Australia has a vigorous and competitive airline market, which is going to be good for passengers, good for workers and ultimately good for shareholders as well.
Prime Minister, on deregulation, are you concerned that your Parliamentary Secretary Josh Frydenberg has been distracted by from his portfolio responsibilities by his involvement in rolling Dennis Napthine in Victorian pre-selections?
Well, I just don't accept the premise of that question. I don't accept the premise of that question at all, and I think he's doing an extremely good job, a very good job indeed.
Prime Minister, back on Qantas, just to clarify, is it your intention, when you talk about levelling the playing field, just to remove the 49% cap altogether and allow the cards to fall as they may, or are you arguing to keep that 49% cap to ensure that Qantas remains an Australian carrier under the Air Navigation Act?
There are two separate acts here. There's the Sale Act, and the government has indicated an intention to remove the restrictions on Qantas under the Sale Act, but there is also the restrictions on carriers under the other Act, and we're not proposing to change them.
Prime Minister, is the debt guarantee off the table entirely? And you're not considering a debt guarantee at the moment or at any point?
Kieran, the point I make is that if you do something for one, in fairness, you've got to do it for all. And this is a government which is not in the business of favouring one company over another. We're in the business of trying to ensure that all Australian companies, all Australian enterprises are given the best possible chance to flourish. And this is why I'm so determined to get rid of the carbon tax, because the carbon tax, as I hope all of you know, was a $106 million hit on Qantas's bottom line in the last financial year. And as John Borghetti said on Friday, strangely underreported statement of John Borghetti's, the best thing you could do for the airline industry right now is get rid of the carbon tax. And I hope that that clip of John Borghetti might get replayed tonight, because he does know what he's talking about. He's running Virgin. He was very senior in Qantas. He knows as much about the airline industry as anyone, and his clear statement, no ifs, no buts, the best thing you can do for the airline industry right now is get rid of the carbon tax.
Minister Robb, could I just clarify with the free trade agreements with Korea, Japan and China, but particularly Korea? In the Parliament the other day, the debate highlighted that some of our agri-businesses, some of our dairy products, for example, were put on a very long finger. And following our free trade agreement with the United States, it looked like our farmers, our beef exporters, for example, pay a higher price than other sectors of our community of Australia to pull off these deals, which in the end are freer trade rather than free trade.
Well, if you look at the South Korean, I think in nearly every case we didn't succeed with rice, but there might be a long tail on some things because of the particular sensitivities in Korea, but they go to zero. They go to trade liberalisation, right? And the thing is that the EU and the US completed free trade agreements 2 years ago. We should have finished it, 4 years ago. This thing started back under the, started some time ago, some years ago, and as a consequence, even though there's a tail to some of these protections coming off, the US and the EU have got a 2-year jump on our industries. If it had gone another year, the gap would have been, seriously detrimental to our trading relationship. So we are now back in a position on lots of products like wine. 15% goes off the day this thing's introduced. Potatoes, 300% goes off the day this is introduced. Manufacturing over the next 20 years will increase, or till 2030, will increase by an estimated 56%. Agriculture trade by 73% by 2030. This is demonstrably good, even though for some products, or some of dairy comes off immediately, other parts come off over several years. Sheep meat comes off over 10 years. Beef comes off over 15 years, but we're on the same track now as the Americans, right? So our advantage, their advantage over us will be neutralised. And of course, already we get $500 million worth of trade in beef. It's going to be a real fillip to so many of our agricultural industries. For most of horticulture, they go to zero immediately. So I think it is the highest quality deal that we've ever been engaged in, notwithstanding the outstanding efforts of my former Trade Minister and a colleague over here, Mark Vaile. But it is the best quality deal that we've ever done, and it will not only help agriculture enormously, and it should, and it is going to be the century of food and water security. So, but it's also for services, which has not received a lot of attention, but our capacity to position services of all sorts, whether it's aged care, health, education, engineering, and all, of course, legal and all the rest, they can go in their own right under this agreement, establish themselves, and it will really open up enormous opportunities for service.
Prime Minister, can I just go back to Qantas? I understand that you're trying to apply some political pressure on the other parties to wade through the changes to the Sale Act. But you can read the numbers like everyone else can, and at this stage that doesn't look all that likely. Will the government consider other things to assist Qantas in the meantime in your discussions this afternoon?
Well, yes, Mark. We will consider getting rid of the carbon tax as quickly as we humanly can because, as I say, it was a $106 million hit on their bottom line. And this is a very significant burden that Qantas is carrying that it shouldn't carry. It's also a burden that the other airlines are carrying. I think Virgin's carbon tax bill was something like $46 million. So this is an unnecessary burden, and the job of government is not to play favourites amongst different businesses. The job of government is not to pick winners. The job of government is to get the fundamentals right, because if we get the fundamentals right, all businesses are best able to compete, they're best able to employ, they're best able to deliver the best possible service. And I want to say this really is one of the key differences between this government and its predecessor. We do not play favourites between different businesses. We do not think that we are better at running businesses than business people are. But we understand that if you want to get regulation down, if you want to get taxes down, only government can do that, and that is our job. Now, we will do our job as well as we humanly can, and we will allow business people to do their job as well as they humanly can, and that is the best way to keep our economy strong, to maximise jobs and to maximise prosperity.
Prime Minister,
Phil?
Prime Minister, just on another matter, do you have any response to the resignation today of AFL Chief Andrew Demetrio? And on a sort of related matter, do you think there needs to be a faster resolution for the football players that still have a cloud hanging over them as relation to the Asada matter?
I think it is unfortunate that the reputation of Australian sport has been blackened as a result of that rather over-dramatic announcement here in Canberra about a year ago. I think that whole business could have been handled a whole lot better. Now, obviously, sport has to be clean and it has to be fair. I think Australian sport, by and large, is clean and fair, and as I said, I think it is unfortunate that the reputation of Australian sports people generally was impacted by that somewhat melodramatic day here in Canberra. Look, as for Andrew, I've got to know him reasonably well over the last few years. He's certainly been a very big figure in the AFL. I think there's been a lot of change and development, a lot of improvements in the code under Andrew, and I congratulate him for the good things he's done. I wish him well in his retirement, but, you know, I'm no AFL expert, and I'm sure when it comes to summing up the career of Andrew Demetriou, there are many people whose plaudits are far more valuable than mine. Thank you.
Okay, so that was live from Canberra, the Prime Minister Tony Abbott and the Trade and Investment Minister Andrew Robb. Tony Abbott is to visit Japan, Korea and China in about a month, and the Trade Minister Andrew Robb to lead a trade delegation to China. They hope to formally sign the Australia-Korea Free Trade Agreement, substantially advance the Japan FTA, and they're optimistic of one with China by the end of the year. And more questions, obviously, there on the Qantas issue. That's coming up in Cabinet later today. The Prime Minister considering changes to the Qantas Sale Act, but it doesn't sound like he's going down that path of the debt guarantee at all.